There exists a man who stands before two doors. Behind one door lies everything he has ever desired: love, abundance, recognition, peace. Behind the other door lies more of what he already knows: struggle, limitation, and the familiar weight of unfulfilled dreams. Most people believe they must choose, must work, must fight their way through the correct door. But what if I told you that this entire scenario is an illusion? What if both doors, and indeed the very room you imagine yourself standing in, exist only because you have assumed they exist? You see, your future is not waiting to be created. It already exists, complete and perfect, in what the ancients called the eternal now. Every possible version of your life, the successful one, the struggling one, the mediocre one, the extraordinary one, all of these exist simultaneously in the realm of consciousness. Your only task, your only real choice, is to assume the feeling of the life you wish to experience and maintain that assumption until it hardens into fact. This is not the philosophy of dreamers or the wishful thinking of the desperate. This is the deepest truth about the nature of reality itself. When you truly assume something is done, not hope it will happen, not believe it might happen, but assume with the quiet confidence of absolute knowing that it has already happened, then what I call the bridge of incidents begins to unfold. Circumstances, people, and events arrange themselves in ways that seem miraculous, but are actually the natural response of a universe that has no choice but to mirror your assumptions back to you. The bridge of incidents is not built by your conscious mind plotting and planning. It is not constructed through your efforts or your strategies. It unfolds automatically the moment your assumption is complete. Before you even know what steps need to be taken, those steps are already. Die being prepared. Before you can imagine how your desire could possibly manifest, the way is already being made clear. This is what the scriptures mean when they say, "Before they call, I will answer." The answer exists before the question is even fully formed. But here lies the great paradox that troubles so many seekers. If everything is predetermined in consciousness, if your future already exists complete and perfect, then why do you experience struggle? Why do you plan and worry and lose sleep over problems that, according to this teaching, are already solved? The answer will shake you to your very foundation, because you have assumed the struggle, you have assumed the problems, you have assumed the limitation. And the universe, faithful servant that it is, has no choice but to deliver exactly what you have assumed to be true. Most live their entire lives backwards, believing that they must first see change in their outer world before they can feel fulfilled within. They wait for love before they can feel loved. They wait for money before they can feel abundant. They wait for recognition before they can feel worthy. But consciousness operates in reverse. The soil has been prepared for those who are ready to move beyond technique into true assumption. The success stories of our time demonstrate the timeless principle at work. Entrepreneurs assume success and build empires from nothing. Artists assume recognition and find themselves celebrated for their unique gifts. Ordinary people assume extraordinary lives and watch their entire existence transform. These are not accidents or exceptions. They are examples of assumption operating exactly as it always has. But success in manifestation, as the modern world measures it, is only the beginning of what assumption can accomplish. The real transformation comes not from getting what you want, but from recognizing who you truly are. The ultimate assumption is not that you can have anything you desire, but that you are already everything you seek to become. This recognition transforms your entire relationship with desire itself. When you know yourself as consciousness, as the creative power of the universe individualized, your desires change. You no longer seek to acquire things to make yourself happy. You no longer need external validation to feel worthy. You no longer chase experiences to fill an inner emptiness. You recognize that everything you have ever sought was actually seeking recognition of your own divine nature. The political implications of this understanding are profound. When enough individuals recognize their creative power, systems of control begin to crumble. Governments depend on citizens who feel powerless. Economic systems depend on workers who assume scarcity. Social hierarchies depend on people who accept their assigned limitations. When masses of people begin to assume their true power, these structures must either transform or collapse. This is why, throughout history, those in positions of power have discouraged the teaching of consciousness as creative. Force. They understand intuitively that a population awakened to its divine nature cannot be controlled through fear, manipulated through scarcity, or oppressed through limitation. The teaching of assumption is, at its core, the teaching of individual sovereignty. But with this power comes profound responsibility. When you recognize that you are creating your experience through your assumptions, you can no longer blame others for your circumstances. When you understand that your consciousness is shaping your world, you must take full accountability for the world you have shaped. This responsibility extends beyond your personal life to your impact on the collective consciousness of humanity. Every assumption you make affects not only your own experience, but the shared reality we all inhabit. When you assume peace, you contribute to peace in the world. When you assume abundance, you help dissolve the collective assumption of scarcity. When you assume love, you strengthen the field of love that surrounds all beings. Your individual transformation becomes a gift to the entire human family. The ethical implications go deeper still. When you know that consciousness creates reality, how do you use that knowledge? Do you assume only for personal gain, or do you recognize your interconnectedness with all life? Do you manifest from ego desires, or do you align your assumptions with your highest understanding? Do you keep this knowledge to yourself, or do you share it in ways that empower others? The greatest assumption you can make is that you are here to serve something greater than your personal desires. When your assumptions align with the highest good of all, when your manifestations contribute to the elevation of consciousness itself, you become a co-creator with the divine intelligence that governs all existence. This brings us to the ultimate transformation that assumption makes possible. Beyond manifesting specific desires, beyond creating ideal circumstances, beyond achieving personal goals, lies the recognition of your true identity. You are not a separate being trying to attract good things into your life. You are consciousness itself, playing the game of limitation and then awakening to your unlimited nature. The end of seeking comes when you realize that you already are everything you have ever sought to become. Peace, love, wisdom, power, abundance, these are not things you need to acquire. They are aspects of your true nature that you need only assume and accept. The feeling of the wish fulfilled is not a technique to get something you lack. It is recognition of what you have always been. When this recognition dawns, manifestation becomes effortless because you are no longer trying to become something you are not. You are simply allowing your true nature to express itself through your experience. You are not creating abundance. You are allowing the abundance that you are to flow through your life. You are not attracting love. You are expressing the love that you are to everyone you meet. This is what I mean when I speak of living from assumption rather than living. Nang in hope. Hope implies that your good is outside yourself, waiting to be attracted or achieved. Assumption recognizes that your good is your very nature, waiting only to be acknowledged and expressed. Hope keeps you in a state of wanting. Assumption establishes you in a state of having. The practical implementation of this understanding begins with examining your current assumptions. What do you assume to be true about yourself? What do you assume to be true about your possibilities? What do you assume to be true about the world around you? These assumptions, whether conscious or unconscious, are creating your experience right now. To change your experience, you must change your assumptions, but this is not done through force or effort. This is done through recognition and acceptance. You recognize that you have the power to assume any state you choose. You accept that consciousness will inevitably express whatever you assume to be true. Then you simply choose assumptions that reflect the life you wish to experience. Start with small assumptions that feel natural and believable. If prosperity seems too far from your current experience, assume comfort. If perfect love seems impossible, assume kindness. If radiant health seems unrealistic, assume vitality. Let your assumptions grow gradually as your confidence in the principle grows. But remember that the size of your assumption is not what matters. The completeness of your assumption is what creates results. Better to assume something small with complete conviction than to assume something magnificent with doubt and uncertainty. The universe responds to the depth of your feeling, not the magnitude of your desire. As you practice assumption, you will notice that your entire relationship with life begins to change. You stop reacting to circumstances and start creating them. You stop hoping for better days and start assuming they are already here. You stop waiting for permission to be happy and start assuming happiness as your natural state. The ripple effects extend far beyond your personal life. When you assume the best about others, you help call forth their highest nature. When you assume harmony in your relationships, you contribute to creating that harmony. When you assume success in your endeavors, you inspire success in those around you. Your assumptions become blessings that you unconsciously bestow upon everyone whose life touches yours. The final paradox of assumption is this. The greatest assumption is that you need not assume anything at all. When you recognize that you are already perfect, complete, and whole, when you know that you lack nothing and need nothing, when you realize that every desire was simply consciousness seeking to know itself more fully, then assumption becomes not a technique for getting, but a celebration of being. In this state, your desires emerge not from lack, but from love. You assume greater expressions of life, not because you are incomplete, but because consciousness delights in knowing itself in infinite ways. You manifest not to fill an emptiness, but to share the fullness that you are. This is assumption in its highest form. Not a method for acquisition, but a recognition of your divine nature. And what of the future? As more individuals awaken to this understanding, as the principle of assumption becomes more widely practiced and understood, what transformation awaits humanity? I see a world where scarcity consciousness gives way to abundance consciousness, where fear-based assumptions dissolve into love-based assumptions, where the dream of separation yields to the recognition of unity. But this future is not something to wait for or work toward. This future exists now in consciousness, waiting only for enough individuals to assume it into manifestation. The bridge of incidents that will carry humanity into its highest expression is already unfolding, guided by the collective assumptions of those who dare to envision and feel a transformed world. Your personal practice of assumption contributes to this collective transformation. Every time you assume love instead of fear, abundance instead of scarcity, peace instead of conflict, you cast a vote for the kind of world you wish to experience. You become a beacon of possibility, demonstrating through your own life that consciousness truly is creative, that assumption truly does become fact, that what is imagined and felt in the depths of being must inevitably express itself in the world of experience. The teaching I have shared with you is not new. It is as old as consciousness itself. Every sage, every mystic, every awakened being throughout history has pointed toward this same truth. You are the creative power of existence individualized. The feeling of the wish fulfilled is your birthright. The bridge of incidents is your inheritance. Assumption is your divine gift. But knowledge without application remains merely intellectual entertainment. Understanding without practice produces no transformation. The truth I have revealed to you must be lived, not simply learned. It must be felt, not simply understood. It must be assumed, not simply believed. The choice before you now is simple. Will you continue to live as a victim of circumstances, or will you assume your role as the creator of your experience? Will you remain at the mercy of external conditions, or will you recognize your power to assume any condition you choose? Will you keep seeking outside yourself for what you already are, or will you finally assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled? This is not a choice you make once and forget. This is a choice you make moment by moment, day by day, assumption by assumption. Each time you choose assumption over reaction, creation over victimhood, being over seeking, you align yourself more fully with your true nature. You become more of who you have always been. The eternal now contains every possible version of your life. The struggling version, the successful version, the lonely version, the beloved version, the limited version, the unlimited version, all exist simultaneously in consciousness. Your assumptions simply determine which version you will experience as your reality. Choose wisely. Choose from love, not fear. Choose from abundance, not scarcity. Choose from power, not powerlessness. Choose from ratan. Recognition of your divine nature, not identification with human limitation. And once you have chosen, assume completely. Feel the reality of your choice. Live from your choice. Be your choice. And watch as the universe, faithful servant that it is, delivers exactly what you have assumed to be true. The greatest teaching I can leave with you is this. You are already everything you have ever wanted to become. Your perfect life already exists, complete and whole, in the eternal now. Your only task is to assume the feeling of that perfection and maintain that assumption until it hardens into fact. The bridge of incidents will unfold automatically. The way will be made clear. All things will work together for your good. Assume it is done and let God unfold the bridge of incidents. This is the secret, this is the truth, this is your inheritance as consciousness itself, temporarily playing the game of limitation but eternally free to assume any limitation away. Rest in this knowing, live from this understanding, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled and watch your world transform to match your highest assumptions about yourself and your life. The kingdom of heaven is within you, it always has been. Assume your place upon the throne of your own consciousness and rule your world with the wisdom of one who knows that all power, all love, all abundance is already yours by divine right. This is my final gift to you, the recognition of who you truly are and the understanding of how to live from that recognition. Use it well, The world awaits your awakening. First comes the assumption, the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and then comes the inevitable manifestation of that assumption in your experience. This understanding came to me not through study, but through lived experience. Born on a small island where opportunities seemed as distant as the horizon, I learned early that the world judges by appearances and treats people according to their circumstances. Yet within me stirred a knowing that refused to accept these limitations as final. When I arrived in New York as a young man, I possessed nothing that the world considers valuable. No money, no connections, no credentials. What I did possess was something far more powerful, the understanding that consciousness is the only reality. Dancing in the theaters of New York, I began to experiment with this principle, not as theory, but as a lived laboratory of experience. I would assume the feeling of success before any evidence of success appeared. I would assume the feeling of belonging in circles where I had never been welcomed. I would assume the feeling of having what I desired before possessing any of it. And invariably, mysteriously, the bridge of incidents would unfold to bring these assumptions into manifestation. These were not isolated incidents or fortunate coincidences. They were demonstrations of a law as reliable as gravity, as predictable as mathematics. When you assume something completely, and when you feel it to be true in the depths of your being, the entire universe reorganizes itself to support that assumption. This is not metaphor or spiritual poetry. This is the mechanics of creation itself. The teachers who came after me would call this the law of attraction, but they would miss the essential point. You do not attract what you want. You attract what you assume to be true about yourself and your world. The difference is not semantic, it is the difference between a life of constant striving and a life of natural unfolding. Through years of teaching in the halls and homes of New York, I watched students transform their entire existence through the simple application of assumption. A woman assumes she is cherished and finds herself surrounded by love. A man assumes he is prosperous and watches opportunities multiply before his eyes. A student assumes health and vitality and experiences the restoration of what doctors had declared impossible. These were not miracles in the supernatural sense. They were the natural result of consciousness knowing itself. Yet the principle remained largely hidden, shared only among those who had the eyes to see and the ears to hear. The world continued to operate from the great illusion, the belief that circumstances create consciousness, rather than consciousness creating circumstances. This illusion runs so deep that even when you first hear this truth, your mind rebels against it. Everything you have been taught, everything you have experienced, seems to contradict this fundamental reversal of cause and effect. Consider how thoroughly you have been conditioned to believe in external causation. From childhood, you were taught that hard work creates success, that other people's actions determine your happiness, that economic conditions control your prosperity, that your past dictates your future. You learn to see yourself as a victim of circumstances, sometimes a beneficiary, sometimes a casualty, but always at the mercy of forces beyond your control. This conditioning is so complete that when circumstances appear negative, you automatically assume something outside yourself must change before you can feel better. When relationships disappoint, you believe other people must change. When money is scarce, you believe the economy must improve or opportunities must present themselves. When health falters, you believe medical intervention must save you. In every case, you look outside yourself for salvation, never suspecting that you are the very cause of everything you experience. But the mystics of every age have understood what modern civilization has forgotten. Consciousness is the only reality. Everything you experience in the physical world is the projection of states of consciousness. Your outer world is nothing more than your inner world, reflected back to you with mirror-like precision. When you change your inner world, when you change your assumptions about yourself and your life, the outer world has no choice but to change accordingly. This is why the ancient civilizations built their entire understanding around consciousness as primary reality. They knew that to change their experience, they must first change their consciousness. They practiced assuming the feeling of their desires fulfilled, not as wishful thinking, but as recognition of how creation actually works. They understood that what we call manifestation is simply consciousness, becoming aware of what it has already assumed to be true. Modern physics has begun to catch up with this ancient wisdom. The observer effect in quantum mechanics demonstrates that consciousness affects reality at the most fundamental level. The act of observation literally changes what is being observed. But even this falls short of the complete truth. Consciousness does not merely affect reality, Consciousness is reality. Everything else is simply consciousness knowing itself in different forms. My own transformation from a young man of humble circumstances to someone who taught the deepest secrets of existence to audiences throughout New York was not the result of lucky breaks or favorable circumstances. It was the inevitable result of assuming a different identity and maintaining that assumption until it became my experience. I did not wait for evidence that I was capable of teaching these truths before I assumed the feeling of being a teacher. I did not wait for invitations to speak before I assumed the feeling of having an audience hungry for truth. I assumed first, and the bridge of incidents unfolded to make these assumptions my living reality. The shocking truth that most are not prepared to accept is this: you are not a victim of circumstances. You are their creator. Every condition in your life, the pleasant and the unpleasant, the desired and the unwanted, exists because you have assumed it into being. Your assumptions may be conscious or unconscious, deliberate or habitual, but they are your assumptions nonetheless. And until you accept full responsibility for your creative power, you will continue to experience yourself as a victim of forces beyond your control. This reversal of understanding, from effect to cause, from victim to creator, from circumstance to consciousness, represents the greatest shift a human being can make. It is the difference between living as a beggar and living as a king, between existing as a slave and knowing yourself as the master of your own destiny. Once you truly understand that consciousness is the only reality, you can never again see yourself as powerless. You may choose to play small, but you can never again claim ignorance of your true nature. Now that you understand consciousness as the only reality, let me reveal to you the forgotten science that governs all manifestation, the law of assumption. This is not another technique to add to your collection of methods. This is the law behind all other laws, the principle that makes every other approach work when it works and explains why they fail when they fail. Assumption is not hope. Hope implies uncertainty, a wish that something might happen. Assumption is not belief. Belief suggests doubt, a mental acceptance that could be shaken by contrary evidence. Assumption is not even faith, for faith often carries with it an element of effort, a trying to believe what does not yet appear to be true. Assumption is something far more powerful and far more natural than any of these mental attitudes. Assumption is the feeling of fulfillment. It is the quiet confidence that comes from knowing something is already done. When you truly assume, you do know, hope your desire will manifest. You feel it has already manifested. You do not believe it will happen. You know it has happened. You do not have faith that it might occur. You rest in the satisfaction of its completion. This feeling of fulfillment is what I call the feeling of the wish fulfilled. It is the inner state that corresponds to having what you desire before you have any external evidence that you possess it. This is the secret that the ages have guarded, the mystery that prophets have veiled in symbol and parable. The feeling of the wish fulfilled is the creative power of consciousness made manifest. When you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, you are not pretending or engaging in mental gymnastics. You are aligning yourself with a version of reality that already exists in consciousness. Every possible state of being already exists in the infinite storehouse of consciousness. Your assumption simply selects which state you will experience as your reality. Consider how this works in your daily experience. When you assume you are loved, you feel loved. When you feel loved, you naturally behave in ways that invite love. When you behave in ways that invite love, others respond to you with love. But the sequence is not behave lovingly, then receive love, then feel love. The sequence is assume you are loved, feel love, behave lovingly, receive love. The assumption creates the feeling, and the feeling creates everything else. This is why most fail in their attempts to change their lives. They try to create the feeling of fulfillment through achieving the desire, rather than achieving the desire through assuming the feeling of fulfillment. They work backwards, trying to create cause through effect, rather than creating effect through cause. They exhaust themselves in effort, never understanding that the feeling must come first. The psychology of assumption operates through the magnificent mechanism of your subconscious mind. Your subconscious mind does not reason or argue. It simply accepts what you assume to be true and works tirelessly to externalize that assumption in your experience. When you assume something completely, your subconscious mind accepts it as fact and begins to attract, create, and arrange circumstances that correspond to your assumption. But here's what you must understand. Your subconscious mind cannot tell the difference between what you assume consciously and what you assume habitually. It responds equally to both. If you consciously assume success for 5 minutes each morning, but habitually assume failure throughout the day, your subconscious mind will externalize the habitual assumption because it carries more emotional weight and occupies more of your mental dwelling place. This is why the feeling of the wish fulfilled must become your dominant state, not merely a technique you practice. It must become the natural feeling tone of your consciousness, the way you habitually feel about yourself and your life. When the feeling of having what you desire becomes more familiar to you than the feeling of lacking it, manifestation becomes inevitable. I have watched students achieve what they themselves considered impossible through the simple application of assumption. A woman who had never known prosperity assumed the feeling of abundance and found herself surrounded by opportunities she had never noticed before. A man who had accepted loneliness as his fate assumed the feeling of companionship and discovered friendship in the most unexpected places. A student who had believed herself limited by education assumed the feeling of wisdom and found herself speaking truths that amazed even her own intellect. These were not gradual developments or lucky coincidences. They were the direct result of assumption creating its own evidence. When you assume something is true, you begin to think from that assumption rather than about it. When you think from an assumption, you naturally notice, attract, and create evidence that supports it. What others call miracles are simply assumptions that have been maintained long enough to harden into fact. The time factor in assumption often confuses those who are new to this understanding. They assume for a day or a week, and then, seeing no immediate external change, conclude that assumption does not work. But assumption works instantly, not in the external world, but in the realm of consciousness where all creation begins. The moment you assume something, it is done in consciousness. The external manifestation is simply consciousness becoming aware of what it has already created. This brings us to the mystery of the bridge of incidence, the invisible intelligence that connects your assumption to its manifestation in your experience. Once you have assumed the feeling of the wish fulfilled, once you have settled into that state with complete acceptance, something remarkable begins to happen. Forces beyond your conscious awareness begin to work on your behalf. Circumstances begin to arrange themselves in ways that support your assumption. People begin to act in ways that contribute to your desired outcome. Opportunities begin to present themselves that move you toward your goal. This is not the result of your conscious planning or effort. This is the automatic response of consciousness to your assumption. The bridge of incidence unfolds through what appears to be coincidence, but is actually the divine order of consciousness expressing itself through your experience. Every assumption sets in motion a chain of events that must ultimately lead to the manifestation of that assumption. The intelligence behind this process is beyond human comprehension. It coordinates the actions of countless people, arranges circumstances across time and space, and orchestrates events in ways that seem impossible to your rational mind. Yet this intelligence is not separate from you. It is the depth of your own consciousness responding to your assumption with mechanical precision. Before you assume something, the bridge already exists. Before you know what steps need to be taken, those steps are already prepared. Before you can imagine how your desire could manifest, the way is already clear. This is the meaning of the scriptural promise. Before they call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear. The answer exists in consciousness before the question is even fully formed. I have seen this principle demonstrate itself in ways that astound even those who understand it intellectually. A student assumes a specific sum of money and finds that exact amount in ways that could never have been predicted or planned. A woman assumes a particular type of home and discovers that the perfect property becomes available at the precise moment she needs it. A man assumes a certain position and finds himself offered that very opportunity by someone he had never met. These manifestations do not come through struggle or effort. They come through the natural unfolding of assumption into experience. The bridge of incidence operates through what the world calls coincidence, but which the awakened consciousness recognizes as the divine order of creation itself. But here is the paradox that trips up most seekers. Any effort to build the bridge yourself actually prevents it from unfolding. The moment you try to figure out how your desire will manifest, you move from assumption into effort. The moment you try to make something happen, you move from faith into work. The moment you try to arrange circumstances yourself, you interrupt the natural flow of the bridge of incidence. This is why I teach the art of assumption without effort, the science of manifestation without manipulation. Once you have assumed the feeling of the wish fulfilled, your work is done. Not because you have done everything, but because consciousness has accepted your assumption and will now do everything for you. Your job is to maintain the assumption and allow the bridge to unfold naturally. Trust becomes the guardian of assumption. When you truly trust that consciousness is working on your behalf, you can relax into the feeling of the wish fulfilled without constantly checking for external evidence. When you trust the process, You can maintain your assumption even when circumstances seem to contradict it. When you trust the intelligence behind the bridge of incidents, you can surrender control and allow the manifestation to unfold in ways that exceed your highest expectations. Yet even with this understanding, even with examples of the bridge of incidents unfolding in miraculous ways, most seekers encounter the same obstacles that have prevented manifestation throughout the ages. These obstacles do not come from outside circumstances or other people. They come from within the very consciousness that has the power to create any reality it chooses to assume. The greatest enemy of assumption is doubt. Doubt is not the opposite of faith, it is the assumption of failure. When you doubt, you are not simply lacking belief in your desire. You are actively assuming that your desire will not manifest. You are using the same creative power that could fulfill your dreams to create evidence of their impossibility. Doubt operates through the same mechanism as assumption, but in reverse. Just as assumption creates evidence to support itself, doubt creates evidence to support itself. When you doubt your ability to manifest your desire, you begin to notice everything that seems to confirm that doubt. You attract circumstances that seem to validate your limitations. You create experiences that seem to prove your powerlessness. This is why doubt is so insidious. It feels like realism, like being practical and sensible. But doubt is not realism. It is the assumption of unwanted outcomes. When you doubt, you are not being realistic about your circumstances. You are using your creative power to make those circumstances more limiting than they need to be. Impatience is doubt's closest companion. When you are impatient for your desire to manifest, you are assuming that it has not yet manifested. You are assuming that consciousness is not working fast enough, that the bridge of incidents is not unfolding quickly enough, that God is not answering your prayers soon enough. But consciousness does not work in time. It works in the eternal now. The moment you assume something, it is done in consciousness. The external manifestation is simply consciousness becoming aware of what it has already created. Impatience reveals spiritual immaturity, the inability to rest in the completeness of what already is. When you are impatient, you are demanding that the external world immediately reflect your inner assumption. But the external world is not the cause of your fulfillment. It is the effect of your fulfillment. When you are truly fulfilled within, you do not need external confirmation to know that your desire has been granted. The world around you will often seem to conspire against your assumption. Friends and family, meaning well, will point out all the reasons why your desire cannot manifest. They will remind you of your limitations, your past failures, your present circumstances. They will offer you their own doubts wrapped in the guise of concern and practicality. If you're not firmly rooted in your assumption, their disbelief can shake your confidence and cause you to abandon your desired state. But understand this, their disbelief has no power over your assumption except the power you give it. Their doubts cannot cancel your assumption unless you accept their doubts as your own. Their limitations cannot become your limitations unless you assume their limitations as reality. Other people's opinions about your desires are simply their assumptions about your life. They have no more power to create your reality than you have to create theirs. Sometimes in the early stages of assuming a new state, circumstances may actually appear to get worse before they get better. This apparent contradiction often causes seekers to abandon their assumption just before it would have manifested. They interpret temporary contrary evidence as proof that their assumption is not working, never understanding that consciousness sometimes clears away old patterns before establishing new ones. This is what mystics have called the dark night of the soul, the period when assumption seems to fail completely, when every external circumstance seems to contradict your inner knowing, when even your own faith begins to waver. But this is not failure. This is the final test of your assumption. It is consciousness asking you, how much do you really believe in what you have assumed? Will you maintain your assumption even when everything seems to prove it wrong? Those who pass this test discover that assumption is stronger than appearance, that consciousness is more powerful than circumstance, that what is assumed in the depths of being must eventually become manifest in the world of experience. They learn that the dark night of the soul is not the absence of light, but the final darkness before the dawn of manifestation. The understanding I have shared with you has not remained hidden in the halls where I once taught. In these modern times, this ancient wisdom has found its way into the consciousness of millions. What was once whispered among small gatherings in New York apartments has become a global phenomenon. The world speaks now of manifestation, of attraction, of conscious creation. Books fill shelves, courses multiply online, and teachers emerge everywhere claiming to hold the keys to deliberate manifestation. Yet in this explosion of interest, something essential has been lost. The pure teaching of assumption has been diluted, commercialized, and often reduced to mere technique. What was meant to be a recognition of your divine nature has become a marketplace of methods. What was intended to awaken you to your true identity has become a catalog of desires to acquire. The modern manifestation movement, while spreading awareness of consciousness as creative power, often misses the deeper truth. It focuses on getting rather than being, on having rather than assuming, on results rather than recognition. Students collect techniques like charms, jumping from method to method, never understanding that all techniques work through the same principle: assumption. They speak of vision boards and affirmations, of gratitude practices and meditation methods, of scripting and visualizing and acting as if. These approaches can be useful, but only to the degree that they help you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Without that assumption, they are empty exercises. With that assumption, even the simplest approach becomes magnificently effective. I watch students today struggle with the same obstacles that students have always faced, but now complicated by an abundance of conflicting information. They try to manifest from a state of lack while learning about abundance. They attempt to attract love while feeling unworthy of it. They work to create prosperity while assuming they are not the type of person who becomes prosperous. They layer technique upon technique, never addressing the fundamental assumptions that create their experience. The commercialization of these truths has created another subtle trap. When manifestation becomes a product to be sold, there is incentive to make it seem more complicated than it actually is. Complex systems suggest greater value. Elaborate methods imply deeper wisdom. But the truth remains elegantly simple. Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and that assumption will harden into fact. Social media has amplified both the power and the peril of modern manifestation teachings. Students share their successes, inspiring others to explore these principles. They document their transformations, providing evidence that consciousness truly is creative. But they also share their failures, their frustrations, their doubt-filled moments, sometimes unknowingly reinforcing the very assumptions that prevent manifestation. The speed of modern communication means that doubt can spread as quickly as inspiration. A student's moment of discouragement, shared publicly, can plant seeds of doubt in hundreds of other minds. The collective assumptions of online communities can either support individual transformation or subtly undermine it, depending on the dominant emotional tone of the group. Yet for all its complications, this modern era offers unprecedented opportunity for those who understand assumption correctly. Never before have so many people been open to the idea that consciousness creates reality. Never before has the possibility of deliberate manifestation been so widely accepted.